Alright, hello again and welcome to back to our video series. Working on the goggles now, and I have to admit that quite a bit further along in this model than the last video. I wanted to just quickly make a little walkthrough video on this model and show you kind of how I built it, and hopefully with the intent to inspire or guide you along your own path. So here we are in this thing, and this video's coming at you after art class Wednesday. Let's see, 19th, where I was really hoping to give you a more thorough walkthrough on my model, although it didn't happen, and so here we are with a video to make up for it. Alright, now as you can see here, I've done a lot of work to get to this point as far as laying out 3D curves and kind of blocking this out. And there's a whole kind of network of surfaces that need to come in on the backside here in order to provide the infrastructure for the foam padding that goes around these goggles. And so the very first thing I did is actually based off of a student's recommendation. Laid out some 3D curves, which you can see here kind of live behind the rest of the model, and with the goal being to build from the main body of the model out to this area. And so starting off with a 3D curve from the top view, or 2D curve from the top view, that kind of just loosely mimics the main body here, and project down, and then from the front project this curve here, which again, we can look at it normal too. It just loosely kind of follows the rest of the model and creates a 3D curve, which we then use with a surface fill to build this panel behind the main model. So we start off with that, and then it's just a series of cut extrudes to kind of block that out. First thing I do is after doing a surface fill here and just getting a nice flat surface back there, thicken it using the thicken tool to a thickness of, I think I used 1 millimeter. Let's take a look. 2 millimeters, okay. Now, as this is the first time I've kind of walked you through this model, I'll tell you that I've backed my design tree, I backed my timeline up through the design tree quite a bit. You can see over here on the left side, you can see all the stuff that's grayed out right now. And so we're going to have a little bit of a rebuild time as I cycle through the features here, so just bear with me. Okay, so I've thickened that surface fill in the back and ready to start trimming it away. The first thing I do is a cut extrude, where I just cut the main hole out there for the goggle area. And then I'm just left with this really nice three-dimensional panel back here. And then the next move that I'll do is to build from the panel to the main body. Let's take a look and see what the design tree tells us. Now this is a phase of the build that took me quite a bit of time to figure out, as in I built it wrong a bunch of times. And that's going to show through here in my design tree. So let's just watch it happen. You can see here what I'm trying to do is, I guess I'm kind of duplicating the 3D curve, trying to get myself a rail that I can use for a sweep to go all the way around. And I finally end up doing that, and you can see the swept surface that I've got. Very simply built right off of a little curve that's down here that just spans from the thickened surface out here and just bashes right into the rest of the body of the model, and then uses this 3D curve as the guide to loop around and end up here. So we see that. Alright, the next is going to be another thicken to thicken that up, so we'll just watch that go down. There she is. Pretty simple. Let's take a look at the thicken. Just edit it. The reason I do that is just to show off the fact that I have merge result unchecked. So when I thicken this surface into a 3D form, I'm not combining it with the rest of the body. I want to keep that separately. And this is me planning ahead because I know that later in the build I'm going to come at this thing from the top view and draw a set of curves and cut holes out of this surface. And when I do that, I want this piece to be its own body so that I can cut out of just it and not the rest of the model. And the other thing you notice too is I've got a fair amount of overlap over here too, so I'm going to have to do some trimming as well. So you can see how this thickened surface just kind of flies right out of the front of my model. Now I could throw some fillets on there and just make it a design element, but I certainly don't want to do that. So I've got this cut extrude right here, cut extrude number 16. It's worth it to just take a look at that thing. Basically it's operating from the top view and going, my top view plane is actually sitting right kind of in the middle of my model. That's my bad, but you can see where the sketch is, and you can see that I've got a cut extrude that goes through all parts of the model in both directions. So this thing's going up and it's going down, and it's basically cutting. Let's look at it from the top view actually. And it's cutting through the model all of this overlap. So it's a very loosely drawn curve. It's tight up here at the center line, but you can see that if I just switch to wireframe mode here, I very carefully start it about a ½ millimeter away from the edge, and just from the inside out I'm just trimming off all of this green is the overlap sticking out of the model. And you can see I drew a curve that lives within the body of the rest of the model and slices all that off, and then just loosely kind of flops out this way just so that I know I can take off. And you can see this line work here very loose. I'm just chopping off the front part of the model that I don't need, and that continues in both directions. So even here on the underside of my model, I'm cutting out whatever overlaps that way. Okay, the important thing to look at is just look at the curve and just kind of notice the maneuver. Okay, so there she goes. Keep going through the tree here. Looks like the next move there was a combine, and what that did is actually combine this outer wall to the panel here, but it leaves the rest of this body separate. It's combined number 2. You can see when I click on it, it highlights the two things that are combined together. And then there's these cut extrudes, cut extrude 18, 19, and 20. So we can go through those one by one. Clicking on them highlights the cuts that they make, so maybe just editing them will give you a little bit more clarity. Starting from the top plane, which again lives in the middle of my model. Looks like on this one I offset it a little bit. I think that when I started the cut extrude from the sketch plane, it was accidentally bashing into the rest of my model down here. This arc was hitting against this panel of the model and causing little cut extrudes in places I didn't want it. So I just set the cut extrude to be offset up here, which means just to start away from the sketch that's driving it. And I just had that cut extrude start way up above the rest of this panel here. And then it just easily flows up and hits just this body alone. That's, remember what I was saying about keeping this body separate. Combine number 2 is what we just talked about. That's the combine feature that I used to combine these two panels together. Again, keeping them separate. And that's how you make those cuts right there. Okay. Now then again, I've got another cut extrude. Again, it's going from the top plane and going down and just hitting, again, looking at my feature scope here, it's hitting just that combined selection of bodies right there. And we can look normal to these sketches just to get a better idea of what we're dealing with. Not rocket science, kind of loosely drawn sketches. You know, I paid a little bit of attention to just creating a similar sized kind of panel here. The good news is these things are editable. You jump right in here and edit these things and they'll update. Again, not the most beautiful line work ever. I could definitely spend a lot more time on it, but it is a Class B surface and doesn't need as much attention as some of the stuff in the front. It's kind of tucked away down there. And then the very last one is just, you know, I'll call it a luxury cut. Let's look normal too. It really doesn't want to look normal too. So over here, you can see this one. Hard to see with all the purple and green. I know the color scheme here is not ideal, but these very thin little kind of oval cuts, just slicing away little holes out of this side panel here. I was so impressed and excited about making these extruded cuts that I figured I might as well just go the extra mile and throw them in over here. There's a lot of work I could do in this area, right? These sketches are sloppy. This wall actually is a little bit thinner than I'd like. But hey, we're going to go with it for now. Because again, you know, if this down here is a Class B surface, then these cuts in here I think are probably Class C. There's very rare, the concept that this area of the model is going to be under scrutiny at any point for this class is very, it's not probably going to happen, especially considering that later in the build we're going to be building our ribbon and our head strap that's going to come out from this area, and that alone is going to look interesting enough to draw pretty much all the attention away from what's happening back here, so I'm really not worried about it. Let's see, what's the next move that I make? This is a difficult area here. I've got a surface extrude. And interesting move what I'm doing here. Let me just see if I can look normal too. Click on my surface extrude. You can see here that I just went to my front plane and I drew a curve that goes from where the nose bridge starts and arcs down and ends at the start of the rest of this paneling here. And then what I'll do is do a surface extrude. Let me just view that and push the surface through the rest of the model and do an intersection curve using this surface and then this face and create a curve on surface where the two meet. If I go down one and show the sketch, you can see, it's hard to see, there it is right there, that orange thing. That's the curve on surface where these two meet, and then I begin the arduous task of trying to create a nose bridge that follows this path. And this was one of the areas of the model where I really started to kind of fudge it. I was just trying to see what I could get to work, and I had a lot of trials and tribulations in this area. You can see here what I do next is I take a plane and I stick it right at the end of that 3D curve on surface that I've created, and that's where I'm setting myself up to do a loft that's going to go from a soon-to-be-built profile curve that'll be up here, follow this guide curve down, and hit another profile curve that's down here. Now I want the profile curve down here to be built in the same fashion as these walls here, so that hopefully when I go from here to here, I end up in a similar type, situation. So it's all tucked into a nice, neat loft. Here it is, loft number 2, and you can see the final result looks like this. We have to take this loft apart in order to understand it, but let me just actually edit this sketch down here since I was just talking about that. So you can see here I've got the plane that I created that's sitting at the end of the 3D curve, and I think what I did is I did a convert entities and selected these two surfaces and did started to sketch on the plane that's here at the end of this curve, and then did a convert entities to sort of project the line work of these two surfaces onto the plane that's here. And then the other sketch, which is here, just turn that on, excuse me, it's up here at the top of my goggles thing up here. Excuse me, it's early. I was up late watching that presidential debate. The thing keep you up late. It's a good comedy show. Anyway, there's this nose bridge here in the neighborhood of this guide curve here, and then the loft that you create at the end of the day, going from that curve down to this one, looks like this. And there's a lot of luck involved in this lofted surface. I mean, you can see here the segmented surface is actually, it's a really bad scene to be in. Usually you'd want a much cleaner scenario, but if you take your edges off, you see that you actually get a really cool kind of disappearing edge. It goes from this hard edge here and fades into a flat edge here. It actually looks really attractive. So this is one of the parts of the model where I felt like I really lucked out doing that loft. But I was left with this kind of nasty looking gap here, and I started to try to think about, okay, how can I fill that gap? Well, I could do a loft from one side to the other, but I've got these two panels are built away from each other. They're not exactly set up for a good loft. I thought, all right, well, maybe I could turn them into surfaces and do a surface knit across here, something like that. All of it seemed just more difficult than I had time to apply. So my final solution was to just, I brought this up in class, I just made a plane out here kind of facing the problem area. I quickly just drew a square around the problem, and then I did that same maneuver I did before where I did a offset boss extrude that starts away from the rest of the sketch and plows into the model until it hits the rest of this body here. And I just blocked right over that problem area. Now in production or in professional industrial design, and if you're working at a job, this would never fly. You would just be back to the drawing board on this whole build part, and you'd be, you know, probably just remaking all these 3D curves and trying to redo a loft that runs smooth. But in our class here, it's not sacrilege or anything to just block right over it, you know, and that's what I did. And you can see the next couple moves that I make if you're looking at my design tree. Let's see, I got two other cut extrudes here. Oh, sorry, yeah, these are just the two cut extrudes to build out the little nose flap here, and then also this 3D cut here. And you can see here that I'm getting actually pretty sloppy right off the bat. After doing this extruded cut, it smashes right into the model and creates this this little kind of uncalled for cut into the surface. I just said whatever, let's just leave it. It's talk about class C. I mean, this thing's on the back end. There's no way that that's gonna look horrible. In fact, it'll probably look a little bit more like a surface treatment like the ones that we have up here in the front of the model, so why not? Okay, and so with that part completed, it's time to start adding fillets, and you can see that I did that. It's an understatement how many fillets I added, but you can tell I'm at the end of my model now. So now I can start adding fillets. That's the part to talk about, is that, you know, these fillets are going to get in your way if you're on the build. So you can see most of my edges are flat, and now it's time to start softening this thing up. I'm ready to do my mirror flip, and I'm ready to prep this thing for rendering, and that means adding microscopic fillets all over the place. And so I'm just going to drag my design tree here through all of these fillets until I get down to the mirror right there, and I'm going to let it rebuild, and it's going to take its time rebuilding. You can see it running down here. Now there's quite a few fillets that failed along the way, I'll admit that. Just be prepared for it. You're not going to get all of them to run it at one time, and if you get caught up in that detail, it could really sink your ship. So be aware that some of them are going to work and some of them are not. Think about your final deliverable. Think about your renderings. Think about what are you really going to show in those final rends, and what fillets do you need, what fillets do you want, and make that be the deciding factor. Okay, so the fillets I added, very small. I just kind of softened up this area here. It's very messy. Look, I'm even missing one here. I can come back in and add that if I want. Yeah, what can I say about it? Get as many to go as you can, but don't spend all night trying to figure out how to get those things in there, because really this is the back side and we're going to have the ribbon and everything covering a lot of that. And so we can be strategic about what we add. Okay? All right, next moves that I make are the mirror. And that's just going to mirror the entire thing over. And then the next move I make is what I brought up in class, where I set a plane where I want the top of the strap to live. And then I lay down, excuse me. Thank you. I lay down this nice arced curve that from the top view you can see very carefully placed that top curve so that it cycles through the hole that I've provided for my head strap, and none of these points touch the rest of the model. I'm very careful about that. Okay, so we'll stay in wireframe mode here for a quick minute. Okay, the next thing I do is I put a plane kind of right at the very end point of this, of the profile curve for what I'm about to do, which is a surface sweep. And then you can see I do a surface sweep number 6. Turn on our shader to take a look at it. Looks like this. I brought this up in class, and this is the area where I'm spending a lot of time making sure that this wrap job here is set up correctly and fills this gap the way I want it, because this is going to be the front and center area of interest on my model, and I need it to look right. If it looks wrong, it's going to make the entire model look bad. So I'm spending a lot of time to make sure that this thing fits into that hole well, and then the rest of my head strap build is going to be pretty easy. It's going to be wide, loopy 3D curves that are built right off of this edge. And so I'm going to get up into that next, and in our next video I'm going to build the head strap. But this is just your however long this video is, 20-minute walkthrough on taking your model from, I would say, about 45% done to a much more refined state. Okay, I'd say at this point now I've got the strap to do, I've got the foam to build, and I'm looking at like 60% finished here, with the understanding that I could go absolutely bananas on the head strap and get really experimental with it if I wanted. It's a boring area of the production side design, of the actual built design, so it's a big opportunity for me as a designer to show off my skill and show what I'm passionate about as far as CMF options and so on. Or if I'm under the gun, I can just kind of flop it in there and let Keyshot and all of its tips and tricks take the lead. Okay, so there you go on that, and keep in touch, and I appreciate you watching. Thanks a lot.